Okay, we will go ahead and get started. This is Talia Scott, and I'm joined by Maylee Stevenson, and Mary Schwartz and Alicia Osborne are also in the room. We are all on the HMIS team here at Commerce. We're going to give you an exciting presentation about the upcoming data standards critical changes. Our agenda today is as follows. We'll review the data standards documents, and we also put some history information into the PowerPoint. We won't talk about that too much. We just want to say that it has changed a lot since the 2014 data standards have been released. And then we'll go through the elements in the order listed on the agenda. First, there's just one project descriptor data element that was changed, universal data elements, and then we're going to pause and we will dismiss people early if the program-specific data element changes are not applicable. So those would be people who need to stay, or is anyone that has any project funded by SSVF, HUD-VASH, RHY, PATH, or HOPWA. We would ask you to stay after the brief intermission. So we're going to do it kind of in two segments. We'll also, Maylee is going to be monitoring and responding to questions throughout the webinar, but we'll be pausing at certain times to see if there are any questions that we can answer out loud to the group. All right, so HUD has a variety of data standards documents available, and within the PDF, you can click on the links to the various documents. The one that's most useful for HMIS users is the HMIS Data Standards Manual. It has a lot more explanation around the various elements than the data dictionary does. So it's geared more towards the user audience. The dictionary is geared towards vendors and HMIS administrators, but you are more than welcome and encouraged to have links to both of these, or you can print them. I caution printing a lot of them because they've been changing so frequently. We'll see kind of a history of the changes here in a second. And then I did want to say that the project descriptor data elements manual, which is mostly just for system administrators and vendors, but again, helpful, has not been updated yet. So when you look at that, the one change that was made won't be reflected. So a brief revision history for you. There's a full list available since we got the 2014 data standards. These are technically the 2014 data standards still, but we are at version 5.1 of the 2014 data standards. Here is a handy list of all of the element changes. We were at version 5 up until August 25th when they released a couple additional changes. So this is a full list of changes that go into effect October 1st. All right, so the first one is a project-specific data element. So this is more for setup, and this is just updating guidance to vendors that they need to allow multiple continuum of care codes to be selected per project. So this is more on the setup end. And I don't believe that anyone in the balance of state has a project that this would apply to. So this is just for projects that are operating in multiple continuums of care. So not cross-county, but cross-COCs. Like if there was a project that was operating in King County and Thurston County. All right, gender. So the change that happened with gender is that they replaced the old option of other with the response doesn't identify as male, female, or transgender. And then they removed the element before where you would type in what the other actually meant. So the only thing that you need to do here is as you are, the vendors are going to map the other all to the new element of doesn't identify as male, female, or transgender. So we always tell you during training, just make sure that gender is up to date and accurate for anyone who is active in your program. I usually recommend doing it right before you exit the client. Disabling condition, this is a change that will require some additional data entry. So disabling condition is on the client profile page, and it's just the question that says disabled, yes, no. So it used to be just for adults and head of household, and now it's going to be required again for all clients. So what you're going to want to do is make sure that anybody who's active in any of your projects October 1st or entered new after October 1st has an answer to that question, because it'll be blank on the profile page. And then start collecting that element for everybody, including children, on October 1st. Okay, so we're going to do something a little bit different here with the major change, which is the new universal data element 3.917. We have a lot of information within the slides to give you extreme details about these changes. It's the biggest change for sure in this version of the data standards. And what they did was they combined the old 3.17 elements and prior residence into two separate elements. And this is all so that chronic homelessness can be accurately reported out of an HMIS. You don't need to do anything other than kind of change the way you're asking the questions for people coming into your project starting October 1st. The vendors have a really lengthy mapping document that they're going to need to do. So on October 1st, or rather in our case, October 3rd, when you come in, the elements should have already been mapped to the new options, and it's possible that they're doing some of that mapping now. We've seen some other things change prior to October 1st. So instead of reading through all of this and try to explain it, our vendor actually made a video that we watched. And by we, I mean Mei-Li, thank you. And I watched briefly. And we feel like it's a good alternative to show you a video within this webinar. So we're going to do that because I'm a big fan of not making extra work.
This video will review changes in the way HUD is asking communities to collect data on living situation, the client's living situation, before coming to your project. These changes will take effect on October 1st, 2016. If you are familiar with the HUD HMIS data standards, HUD is combining data element 3.9, residence prior to entry, with 3.17, length of time on the streets, in an emergency shelter, or in a safe haven. The combined element is now known as 3.917, living situation. The reason for this change is HUD is working to improve how living situation information is collected to determine whether someone is considered chronically homeless. This is important to communities so that scarce resources are allocated appropriately to those that are truly experiencing chronic homelessness. There are two approaches that we're going to take to collecting living situation information. For emergency shelter, street outreach, and safe haven projects, there will be very little that is changed in how the information is collected. For all other projects, however, there are much more significant changes. But no worries, Clarity Human Services will make it easy for you to navigate those changes. Now let's take a look at how this will be handled for an emergency shelter project enrollment. It'll be the same process for street outreach and safe havens as well. On this screen, I'll demonstrate how the living situation questions will be handled for enrollments in emergency shelter projects. You'll notice the question, is the client an adult or head of household, shown here. This will automatically calculate whether or not somebody is an adult or head of household. If they are, then the living situation section will display the questions. If they're not, you won't see that section. Most of the fields in this section have had some minor wording changes, either to the name of the field or the responses for that field. In type of residence, you may notice that they're now organized by whether or not it's a homeless situation, an institutional situation, or a transitional or permanent situation. The other thing to notice here is a new field called interim housing. This field allows chronically homeless clients to be in stabilized temporary housing without affecting their chronic homeless status. For example, if a client has a voucher for permanent housing and is looking for an apartment, in the meantime, they may be living in a transitional housing program. You should record that as interim housing, since they are only staying there until their permanent situation is ready. Doing this will not affect their chronic homeless status. The other thing to notice is that other will be removed from the choices starting on October 1st. You'll also notice that the other text field that had been here will also be removed starting October 1st. Number of times on the street, in emergency shelter, or safe haven in the past 3 years. Starting October 1st, you won't see never in 3 years. This choice will be removed. All the other living situation questions only have minor wording changes. Now let's look at how the living situation questions are handled for projects other than emergency shelter, street outreach, and safe havens. The starting point for this is type of residence. Where was the client sleeping before coming to your project? As I mentioned earlier, the type of residence are divided into 3 categories now. Homeless situations, for example, emergency shelter or sleeping outside. Institutional situations like jail or psychiatric facilities. And transitional or permanent situations. This category also includes cases where the client doesn't know or refuses to say where they stayed previously. The next step in the process is to look at how long they were in that situation. For all homeless situations, they're all included, no matter the length of stay. For institutional situations, you want to consider, did they stay less than 90 days? And for transitional or permanent situations, was the stay less than 7 days? The next step is to consider where they stayed before that institutional or transitional situation. Were they in an emergency shelter, safe haven, or staying on the streets? If the answer to all these questions is yes, or if they came from a homeless situation previously, then all the remaining living situation questions should be answered. Now that sounds terribly complicated and confusing, but the good news is the BitFocus team was able to make it very simple to navigate this in Clarity. Let's take a look at how this will work in Clarity Human Services. On this screen, I'll be showing you what it would look like to do an enrollment into a transitional housing program and how the live-in situation questions will behave for those types of projects. Once again, you'll notice that you've got the question whether or not the client is an adult or head of household, and it also will automatically generate. And because this is an adult and the head of household, and because it's a transitional project that we're enrolling them in, There's only 2 questions here for living situation. At first look, it's quite a bit shorter, but that's just at first look. As soon as I switch this to, let's say that the place of residence before coming in here was emergency shelter, now you'll notice all the questions have appeared. And so that's the same process. Everything else is the same as what we talked about with emergency shelters, safe havens, etc. But notice what happens if I change it to being a jail, that the person was staying in jail. Now you get a couple more questions, like how long were they staying there? So I'm going to say it was 1 to 3 months for now. And then you also need to do an extra, just a little bit of a check. Is that less than 90 days? And in this case, you're going to say yes. And then as soon as I do that, we get another question. And this is regarding what, before they were in jail, where were they staying? Were they staying on the streets, in emergency shelter, or safe haven? If the answer to that is yes, then you once again get the remaining questions about living situation. Just going to undo all of that. Now it would be the same thing if we chose, if they were coming from some type of permanent or transitional situation. And let's say we're going to go with this one, that they're getting some type of housing situation. Same thing happens here, where these 2 questions happen, or there, but it's also, now it's saying less than 7 nights. So then you say, how long was that? 2 days to 1 week. Was that less than 7 days? Yes. And then we get that emergency shelter question. Where were they staying before that? And if I say yes, then once again we get that same action. But now let's say they were actually more than a year. That's way more than 7 nights. And so you'd say no, and then that's it. No more questions show up. And once again, kind of confusing, but you don't need to worry about it, because all you're going to do is just answer the question to the best of the client's ability for the information that they give you, and Clarity will figure out what you do or do not need to answer. Let's take a look once more at the logic now that you've seen how it will work in Clarity. Remember, this only applies to projects other than emergency shelter, street outreach, and safe haven. You're going to be asked to respond to the living situation questions depending on the type of residence and how long the client stayed at the residence. And then whether or not they were in a homeless situation before. Remember, October 1st, 2016 is the day the new HUD data standards take effect. Between now and then, you may notice some small changes to question names and responses. Not to worry, that is to be expected. Thank you for your time, and go out and do good data.
So one of the questions is about forms. Are there example paper forms that we can use if we do not enter directly into the web forms? The BitFocus folks have forms on their website that they've told us will be updated for continuum of care, entry, exit, and status assessment. Also, there's some of the federal program questions there.
We didn't get a date on when those will be updated, but we were told that those would be updated.
So, and if any of you have already updated your form for this particular element and wouldn't mind sharing, we also could distribute if you've already done that work. And otherwise, we can send out a notice to all state users when BitFocus does update their forms.
I have a question on what is the difference between safe haven and emergency shelter. The definitions are in the HUD Data Standards Manual.
Here's one hint. No balance of state agencies operate officially safe haven project type code. The only safe haven officially in the state of Washington is in King County. So likely nobody in the balance of state will use the choice safe haven.
And we've had a lot of people in the past that would think safe haven was domestic violence shelter, and that is not the case.
We have another question about the universal data elements asking about disability, and that it is only required to ask if they have a disability, but not the disability type. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Another question. I'll go back to the disability. Can you repeat that about the disability types?
So the question, the way it appears in HMIS is it's just a question that says disabled, yes, no. And you've been answering that for all adults and heads of household already. So it's when you're initially entering a client into the system. It's their profile, not their project record. So now everybody needs to have that question answered starting October 1st.
What if the client was homeless before they went into institutional situations, but they stayed for more than 90 days? Does that make a difference?
Yes. So there's very specific language in the chronic homeless rule, and that's why these questions have gotten so specific, because if you stay in an institutional setting for longer than 90 days, even if you were homeless before that 90 days, then you are no longer eligible to be counted as chronically homeless for like a permanent supportive housing program. You're still in a bad situation, but you're not chronically homeless.
I have a question about where do I find the BitFocus forms. We do have a link on our website to the Clarity Help portal. And if you go to the Clarity Help portal, at the very bottom of the page, there's a section with forms.
And we will show you all of that before we dismiss everyone as well.
Another question, how is disabling condition different from disabled?
And there are program-specific data elements that go into detail about the type of disability, and then there's subsequent questions that are asked about whether or not it's long-term and whether or not it's being treated. So, I mean, generally, if you say yes to disabled and your project requires you to answer the various disabling condition questions, such as do you have a chronic health condition or a mental health condition, then you would get into a deeper dive of what the disabling condition is.
Do we need to go back and answer the new living situation questions for clients already entered in HMIS prior to October 1st? Or may be entered already and getting assistance past October 1st, or just new clients entered beginning October 1st?
So the vendors have the responsibility of mapping over all of the previous data that you entered to the new elements. So you don't have to do anything for this one other than starting October 1st, enter the data in this different way and gather the data in this different way.
If somebody's active in your program as of October 1st, do you need to update anything? Isn't it active and new going forward?
But I think, from what I can tell, the mapping instructions aren't, they're a fun read, but from what I can tell, everything should be mapped over, but yes to updating.
The way I think of it is if you are going to have to report out on a federal report or any other kind of funder-based report that you know is going to require the data element, and it's October 1 and you've got somebody in your program carrying over into October 1 and beyond who you know is going to show up in that next fiscal year cycle of reporting, You're going to want to make sure the data elements are up to date. Those that haven't been automatically mapped over for you by the vendor, you'll want to go and make sure, and try and remember to do it not the day whatever report you need to run is due, right? But give yourself some time to make sure you're cleaning up some of the data quality issues that might exist for those clients that have carried over, that the question wasn't asked when they entered the program, so there was no way that the vendor could have mapped over some answer to that question from their prior to October 1 information. But since they're in October 1 or beyond, that information is going to be required for whatever report is due. That's kind of the way to think about your data entry and data updating responsibilities. It's hard to know in every situation what is going to be done, what isn't going to be done, but you have a tech support team to contact here at Commerce that can help you walk through some of the detailed situations. When in doubt, make the data right.
So we had a question about the disability or disabled questions, and I had answered that, but I just thought I'd share it with everybody. Where are those questions? Are they on the demographics, aka profile page, or program entry? They're part of program entry, status assessment, and exit pages. So do we have to update all existing clients as far as disability, or just when we make a change to the client?
So for anybody that's active in your program on October 1st, meaning they're a carryover or entered new after October 1st, answer the disabled yes/no question. So if you have a household with adults and children on October 3rd, when you come in, that disabled yes/no question will show up on the minor's records where it wasn't there before. So you will need to answer that, and go ahead and answer that on the enrollment page, assuming that that disability was there when the child enrolled in the program. The only time you would do it as an update would be if something changed. If they weren't disabled when they came into your project, but now they are 6 months later, then that you would do that on the update through like an update or a status assessment. But for whatever it was, the entry, just go ahead and enter that on the enrollment page. And then we've got another question. Does that include the housing interest pool? And every county has their coordinated entry set up different. So I don't know without looking at the setup of that particular project. So if you could send one of us an email, we'll take a look and see which questions are asked in your interest pool. There aren't any data requirements around coordinated entry in HMIS yet. So it's just really varied across the state. Okay, we're ready to move on. And actually, I'll go back here for a second just to show you in the PDF that is available as a handout. Will be posted on our website as well. So what I did was I printed this out and put it on my wall. It makes it so much more clear. This is a link to the video within our video, the one that we just watched that Clarity put together for 3.917. Residential move-in date. So word about this. This has been around since 2014. The only thing that changed was that the collection instructions have been clarified and the information date and yes/no response have been removed from the element. So I underlined this part because as a rule, we have an option. So Commerce has always erred on the side of telling people to enter. Now this doesn't apply to SSVF, so make that a side note. If you're in an SSVF rapid rehousing project, what I'm about to say doesn't apply because the VA does use this element. So Commerce and the instructions that we've given before, although this can change, I just think it presents a lot more data quality issues. If you want to enter someone into your rapid rehousing program to track pre-housing case management services, we recommend that you don't enter them into your rapid rehousing project until the day they move in. And the reason for that is we do a lot of reporting on lengths of stay in projects, and it requires you to remember to go back and update the record when that client moves in, if we use the residential move-in date for any kind of reporting. So rather than have it look like you've got 20 people in rapid rehousing that you never moved into housing, we are on the side of just don't enter them into your program until they've moved into housing. If you really need to track the services or show that they're in a services only project, do that separately. So the data standards provide both of these options. If it were up to me, I would say nobody can use it except for SSVF, but we like to provide you with options, but just err on the side of not entering anyone into rapid rehousing until they've actually moved in. If you have questions about that, it's been a hot topic for a couple years now. Just shoot any of us an email, and if it's something that you're doing, you want us to know that you're doing it, that's great. The more information we have, the better.
Question: when our clients transition from the shelter to a more sustainable housing, we typically pay first and last damage before they move out. It secures the place till the move-in date. The way I understand what we just said is that you should wait to enter the amount and enroll them into rent assistance until they have completely moved out of shelter. Is that correct?
I mean, you don't have to. The only thing I would say is that if they don't end up moving in for whatever reason, you just have to contact us to delete the record. It's just that the date of program entry should match the date of move-in, give or take 5 days, I think is the guidance we published a couple years ago. So if I pay rent for Alicia to move into an apartment beginning October 1st, I want her program entry date to be October 1st. But if I really want to enter services that are not required, then I could make her program entry date 9/25 or 10, all the way up through 10/5, but preferably 5 days earlier. So yeah, I mean, it's up to you. If you're trying to get that in because you want to run reports, it's totally fine. It's not banned or anything like that. What looks bad is when you're trying to work with someone to get into a housing unit for 6 months, and it looks like they've been in your rapid rehousing project for a year when really they only were in there receiving rent assistance for 6 months. So that's the problem, because we generally just report on start and end date for lengths of stay in programs. And we don't, just so everybody knows, and I'm sure you know, Commerce does not require services for CHG and EFH, but local counties have requirements that their agencies enter their CHG rent, EFH, whatever it is, into HMIS. And some people just like to.
Have another question. I've noticed a box that can be checked that is next to the question that says client engaged. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that should be fixed now. It was a bug within Clarity that, so the client engagement is specific to outreach, and then it's also supposed to be asked for any ESG funded night-by-night shelters. The error started last week, I believe, and it was showing up for all services only programs. So we just advise people, if you're not street outreach, if you're not an ESG funded night-by-night shelter, just put no or data not collected or whatever the equivalent is. And so the date of engagement is about the date that the client, you started a relationship with the client in case management. So that's why it's used only for outreach and night-by-night shelters funded by ESG. This is just some pages for the resources that you have access to. So you can actually go to the HUD website and watch various videos about each of the data standards, and they have tutorials available. They're not software specific. It's not going to go into like the how do you enter this data or what do your screens look like. But if you have questions about a certain element or want more information and it's clickable there, then you can get additional information there. There's also the Clarity Help Portal. The web link is right here, and hopefully a lot of you have been using this. The only caveat is that we do have some things that are slightly different with our instance of Clarity, some changes that we've made. So if you see something and you wonder, well, that doesn't look like my screen or that's not what I see, it's because we have customized the product a little bit. We did our best to not do very much customization. It's, pretty good off-the-shelf product, but we did make some slight changes. And then this is where you would find the sample forms when they get updated. And last but not least, our HMIS webpage. So this is where you can find training information, technical assistance, team contacts, how-to guides, links to everything you want to know HMIS related on the HUD website. And then we also publish HMIS reports here. Okay, so at this time, you get to decide whether or not you get to come into the bonus round. So if you have one or more projects funded by any of the following federal funding partners, aka FFP, you get a webinar extension. UR VA programs, including SSVF or HUD-VASH, RHY, PATH, and last but not least, HOPWA, which to my knowledge, I don't think any balance of state HOPWA grantees are using HMIS right at the moment, but you are more than welcome to stay. You can also stay if you just want to, but I'm going to tell everybody else that you can leave now, and we're going to go through the elements that only affect one or more of these. Okay, income and sources. The only change happening on October 1st is that now PATH is required to collect this data for all project types. In the balance of state, and I believe statewide, we only have PATH. We're only using street outreach, so it really is just one project type. If you do happen to have two project types, it's required for both. If you have case management, like a services only project, and an outreach, it would be for both. On October 1st, anybody that you have an established relationship with and that you're still in contact with, you're going to go in and you're going to update their record with income information and details about what specific things are in that element can be found by using the link here. So again, on October 1st, start updating your records as you get the information. We understand with outreach programs, sometimes these program-specific data elements get inputted into HMIS over time as you build that relationship with the client. So it's the same with non-cash. PATH is now required to collect that data. And bonus, health insurance. I kind of think of all these as like a 3-in-1 anyway. So you're going to be collecting income, non-cash benefits, and health insurance. They've also added Indian Health Services program as an option, and other has been added as a response option. Here is a screenshot of what it is going to look like in Clarity. When you're entering a client now, it's just a drop down here. If you say yes, it expands and asks you about the sources and amounts. Non-cash, if you say yes, it expands. So, and then down here, same thing with health insurance. All right, the term outreach has changed to re-engagement, and screening/assessment response was split into two responses. Housing technical assistance changed to housing eligibility determination, and other PATH-funded service was removed. A lot of changes to the referrals provided in PATH. They've changed some response options. Primary health care changed to primary health/dental care. Relevant housing changed to housing services. So it's just a lot of clarifying and term changes. They also clarified that collection of referral information on job training, educational services, and housing services are optional, not required. So if you have a project in Clarity, those are going to be there, but as far as PATH is concerned, you don't have to enter those. If you want to, you can. PATH is now required to collect connection with SOAR at entry, update, annual assessment, and exit. So this is just to identify people who are connected to the SOAR program. Update anybody who's active in your PATH outreach project as of October 1st. Update their entry record for what their status was at the time of entry, and then collect it for people moving forward as you get the information. Last grade completed was previously just required for youth served in RHY projects. And now SSVF and HUD-VASH funded projects will also use the element. So anyone that's active in your program on October 1st, you should get this information and update their record. The field will be blank on their entry page. Go ahead and update it there and then collect it for anyone that you enroll 10-1 moving forward. And they've also updated with some new response categories. A lovely screenshot of what it looks like and where it is in Clarity. 4.26 employment status. Collection now includes HUD-VASH. So I don't think we have very many HUD-VASH projects. And when I say HUD, it kind of makes it sound like if you have COC funded, and it's specifically just VASH, basically. So if you have a VASH project, you're entering data into HMIS, then you are going to start collecting employment status. And we're not showing all the response options. Most of the time, the response options are pretty similar throughout the data standards. And so if you want to see the details of that, you can click here and go to the pages. HUD-VASH wins another, general health status. The rationale still talking about homeless youth and other people their age. And this is like a subjective question asking the people you are serving how their general health status is. Is it excellent? I think it's excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor, I believe are the options. And I think there's also data not collected and client refused or client doesn't know. So they went ahead, this is just going to be for SSVF, for homeless prevention projects. Used to be 4.44 HP screening score. It is now 4.48 HP targeting criteria. So it is a new data element and it replaces the old one. And then you can see the full details in the data manual or the data dictionary. And here's the screenshot of what it looks like now. And this should only show up if you're in SSVF, homelessness prevention type project in HMIS. Oh, I did want to make a quick mention, and it was in my notes and I forgot to mention earlier. I believe most of you know, but we received confirmation from our vendor that via the VA, the final CSV export under the current version of the data standards that will expire at the end of this month, your final export needs to be pulled from Clarity on September 30th. So your admins are going to be, if they haven't already, in contact with you telling you to get your data right in HMIS, because after September 30th, over the weekend, our vendor is going to disable that and the VA will not accept uploads past the 30th. So you should have received an email from the VA about that, but we're passing it on along as well. And this is just new information today because we thought an extension might be possible, but I guess the VA is on board with making people do their final export on September 30th. So it's unfortunate and we are sorry. We really did try to get a different response. It's super inconvenient, and apparently if you don't get your export, our vendor might be able to help you after October 3rd, but that there would be a cost involved. So do whatever you can to get your CSV pulled. That's the last business day. If you want to work on Saturday and Sunday, I think you have till 5 o'clock on October 2nd would be the very last minute, but there will not be any HMIS assistance available to you through Commerce because we don't work on the weekend.
So we don't have HUD-VASH, but our HUD-VASH caseworkers required to use and enter data into Clarity.
So my understanding is that HUD-VASH caseworkers, it's weird. So HUD-VASH people that are, projects are encouraged to participate in HMIS, but the caseworkers that are employed by the Veterans Administration are prohibited from entering data into HMIS. However, what generally happens is the Housing Authority enters the data. So I think the Housing Authority or Community Action or whoever in that county is doing the vouchers does the data entry. And it does, so that's the last I knew about HUD-VASH. They would like participation, they want participation, but the VA case managers cannot enter data into HMIS. They might be able to view data. I don't fully know the reasons behind that, but I do know the last time I looked, that was what I found.
Does the SSVF HP targeting criteria data element score it for us after we enter it?
I'm going to refer to the data standards and make sure. It actually doesn't say specifically.
We could look it up. We have
The data standards don't say specifically as to whether or not the vendor has to make it add or not. So we'll test it out. It might be somewhere else where it says that I'm just not seeing it in the dictionary. Okay, use of other crisis services. This is a new data element required for HUD-VASH and SSVF. So new data element starting October 1st. Get this information from your people, and then it is 4.49. You can find the exact questions in the data dictionary or the data manual, and some looky-like SPDAT type questions that are now going to be collected for those types of projects. All right, now we're getting into RAI. All right, 4.41B, services provided, RHY. And this is actually a really good change. Requirements have been corrected to clarify that each service type need only be recorded once during project enrollment. So RHY, services provided, you're providing a service to a youth. Let me think of a terrible example that will probably be totally wrong, but I don't want to go through the data dictionary. Just a case management service, just a generic service. You don't have to enter that every single time you provide that service to that youth. Entering it once is good. So, a youth should you're only required for a youth to enter one time per service type per project enrollment. Same thing with referrals provided. So if you're making a mental health referral, which again is probably a terrible example, but if you're making a mental health referral for a kid that you're serving, you don't need to enter that. If you refer them to 3 different places in one day, it just goes in one time, period. If you have to re-refer them, still one time, as long as it's in the same enrollment record. And HOPWA. T-cell and viral load, I don't think we have anybody in the balance of state who's actively entering their HOPWA data in HMIS. It's just a response option change. And here's a picture of it.
For the outreach program, a participant is entered in the program. Do we enter services provided for each individual contact following enrollment, like clothing provided, food, written materials, only once ever or only once per contact?
So this is for RY. So there's RY outreach and there's PATH outreach, but let me double check. I think that clarification was in the last data standards, but I'm going to double check. So PATH released this nice, you only have to do it once. For RY referrals, it's transactional. Each time there is a referral, a record of the referral must be recorded. Multiple types of the same referral must be made over the course of project enrollment. So where PATH said, hey, just enter it once, RY said, enter all of them, and that's required for all components. I'll check on the services because that was just referrals. And it is the same response for services. It does specify that if the service benefits the entire household, it may be recorded solely for the head of household. Yeah, so that for whatever reason, the funders had different guidance and decisions on that.
So we have a question about how do we request additional data fields? It would be extremely helpful to have housing status at exit. I believe we have housing status at exit right now on the program exit screens.
Yeah, our vendor kept it there, even though it's not a data standard anymore. It's just optional. So it is there. Okay, that's all we have for our presentation.
And thank you all for attending. Bye.
Bye.